you are the first guest of Boiler Wild, and just go into a little background of who you are, what you do, and how you got into the boiler industry.
Well, thank you for having me on. So I'm with Cici Boiler Rooms, and we've been around since 1965. So we're going on our, 60th year. So my grandfather was the one that actually started the business. And before then, he was a traveling sales rep for a company known as American Standard, and he was their boiler guy. So he sold Kewanee boilers way back when they were known as American Standard Kewanee. So he decided that Evansville, Indiana was going to be the hot spot to be in, and he decided that he was going to settle in there, and he knew some contacts at Cleaverbrooks, and so that for the longest time was our sole line. We didn't have any of the lines. We just had Cleaverbrooks. So yeah. So my uncle Frank Cici, he came on in I believe it was the 80s or so, and then I came along in 2013. So it's been a fun ride for sure, and seen many things that been interesting, and some things I wish I hadn't seen. So yeah, it's been a good time for sure.
Did you go to college?
Yes. So I have a background in communication studies. So of course it doesn't apply to any sort of boiler work, but you kind of learn as you go. And it seems to me that most of the time the guys that know the most about boilers didn't go for a mechanical engineering degree. So it almost seems to me that a lot of this stuff is trial and error. What worked for you guys on this project, pass on to the next job. So,
I mean, I would say probably a mechanical engineering degree. They might mention a boiler and steam, but that's probably all you're getting of
right.
4 years of college. Now, so you said your grandfather started the company. So I believe you're vice president now? Is that?
Yes.
Does that involve ownership? Like, there's a lot of talks of succession as the baby boomers are aging out, and there are a lot of companies that are either going to just close the doors in the next 10 years, or they're just going to get passed to somebody because the owner has no idea what to do with them. Are you the guy, or are you sharing it with somebody? What's going on with that?
Not yet. Hopefully someday I will. I think that we would like to continue to keep it in the family. So, and we do have a succession plan for keeping it in the family. But that's the plan, is to keep it a family owned and run business. And obviously we can't have all family members, so we do hire outside the family, of course, and that's been great because get other experience from other individuals. So, but yeah, we do. That's our goal, is to keep it in the family and passed on to the next generation.
Do you? I guess when did you graduate college?
2013.
All right, so you said you started in 2013. So has this been really your only professional experience, is working with boilers?
So I actually worked at a almost defunct company called Sears, and I worked there in college, and I just loved it. It was great. I sold lawn and garden equipment, so lawnmowers, tractors, and then kind of moved up a little bit and helped out with almost a little bit of a management role, and then kind of did the back office stuff, putting out displays and signage and that kind of fun stuff. And it kind of taught me that maybe this whole sales thing is kind of fun, maybe I can make a living off of doing sales. So despite working for a company that was slowly sinking away, but yeah, I had a good time for sure.
So with family companies, that's always an interesting dynamic, but it's as you are most boiler service companies or sales companies, you are a small business. Most companies in the boiler industry are 50 or less employees, and a lot of them are family run or started by families and have generations in that. And you go on LinkedIn every day or Facebook, or you open up the news and you see corporations laying off thousands and thousands of people. And then you also see corporations adopting AI and, essentially replacing entire departments of people, of like customer service reps who they say we no longer need these people, and everything's about revenue and growth. So I guess the job market and corporate culture is changing. And like what do you think a small company, or even a family run company, like what are the benefits of it to somebody who may not know what it's like, or has only ever worked for a company where they're a number and they have no idea who their boss is, and they just randomly get fired someday, or they get laid off? Like what do you see in the next 10 years? Do you see small companies rising up? Because really small companies are the backbone of America, I feel like, and the boiler industry being a bunch of small companies, like I've never heard of some boiler company saying, "Hey, we're laying off 30 service technicians because of a corporate restructuring." Like that just doesn't happen. Like I guess, like what do you see the next 10 years? Because it's going to be wild, as we're this baby boomer generation is ending and retiring, and there's a lot up in the air, and people are looking for security in their company and hoping that their job is going to be there.
I'm seeing quite a bit of companies getting purchased by like MCore, and kind of seeing them buy up small businesses. But I have to wonder, um, what's going to happen to those businesses? Because what I'm seeing around here is they'll come in and offer a whole building service package, and they'll take care of the chillers, the boilers, do everything. And then I'm seeing them slowly not do anything, and then raise their prices, and then get kicked out. And then the customer brings back their old service provider. So that's what I'm kind of seeing. As far as um people getting laid off, no, I am not. Um I know of a handful of companies that have had some financial troubles, but they've never really closed per se. Um, there's such a strong demand for uh, people that actually know boilers, not just, well, you worked on chillers, so you can also do boilers. And I don't think that really applies at all. Obviously, I don't have any background in chillers, but I know enough to stay away from them. So um, that's what I'm kind of seeing, at least, is the purchase of smaller companies by um, a bigger kind of a holding firm, I guess you can call it. And I don't really think they're kind of like a private equity group, but more of like a holding firm. So
And on the employee side, like what would you say is a benefit to a small business? And I know there's a lot of online, everybody's like, oh, we're a family here and whatnot. But then all the cynics are like, well, they'll fire you just as fast as whatnot, and you're not family, and always put yourself first, and your employer is there to extract you for as much money and then discard you. Like, I think a lot of that corporate thinking comes from larger corporations who definitely do that, but just from my experience and just from seeing other companies, like there are companies out there who actually care about their employees, who care about your family. And yes, they may fire you, you may quit and move on, but there is a level of care there. And like, I guess, what is your perspective for people who may have not worked in a smaller company, or like, what are the benefits to a smaller company? And it doesn't even have to be family run, that you see is a positive over maybe a larger conglomerate where that's 500 employees, and nobody knows what the other person's doing.
Well, I value all of our employees, and I also, every little job matters to me. It doesn't matter if it's, two 500 horse boilers or if it's a 20 horsepower low pressure steam boiler going to a church. Every job matters to me. And I really don't like having issues after the fact, or when a customer comes to me and says, "Hey man, this whole system just didn't working out." That drives me crazy. I really like making sure that the customer is happy, making sure that the customer is getting what they wanted. It's doing the job that it needed to. Um, I I have yet to have a project where we've just had to bail on it because of one reason or another. I would rather figure it out than have a problem customer that's just going to keep calling us because it's not right. I'd rather fix it right than just say, well, I got 500 other jobs, and if I lose one, well, it is what it is. So I'd rather keep them all happy and make sure things are done right for sure.
Yeah, that is, there are two different business senses, where there's one that there's this churn and burn, and I would say that's probably more prevalent in residential HVAC. You get a new system installed and you do whatever you can to get that new system installed, collect the check, and then run. The problem with commercial and industrial boiler systems are, you sell them a boiler and, well, we'll put a plug in for Hearst, sell them a Hearst fire tube boiler, and, you install that in 2025, and you can go back in 2050 and they still have that same boiler. So when customers are purchasing a boiler, you're almost marrying the person who is selling you that boiler. And for a certain amount of time, the customer is 100% reliant on that company for installation guidelines and startup guidelines. And, I always tell people, a boiler's life starts at the install. And if it's not installed correctly, it's doomed. And how you get a long life is you get that installed correctly. And a company like Cici Boiler, you have a benefit being a company that is only focused on boilers. Yes, you don't do everything, but you are the experts when it comes to boilers. And like, do you have any, I guess, customer experiences, or like, how do you leverage that expertise of, hey, we're the boiler experts. Yeah, we may not do air handlers and chillers and all that stuff, but like, you can trust us when it comes to boilers. And then when you sell a boiler, it's, hey, like, you can rely on us, because like, as you said, we want to see the project through. We don't care about, selling that boiler, you install it and then have problems, and then, nobody picks up the phone. Like, how do you see that relationship being like the expert in boilers?
Well, so I really enjoy going out with contractors and doing a walkthrough just to explain, like, all right, here's where they want the water connection to be. Here's where they want the blowdown connection to be, where the controls are going to be. You know, those don't cost us anything to change, but they can make a huge difference in how the install looks, the functionality, everything. And that, you know, like I'm doing a project right now where we're ripping out a old crusty Power Master boiler from like the 50s and putting in a 100 horsepower Hearst boiler. And we're completely changing things around. We're going from a 3-pass to a 4-pass boiler, mainly because the stack just aligns up perfect for pulling tubes out the door. And, you know, we're changing the gas connection side, the water connection side, just because, well, it saves pipe length and making it so that it's easier for the contractor to install, so the turnaround time's a lot less. We're not having to run pipe under or over the boiler in order to get where we need to go. We're just making it so that, all right, here's what we got, and let's make it work and make it work well. So I really do enjoy, you know, making sure that the customer and the contractor are going to be, you know, not in a terrible bind. You know, projects that if there is a tight space, I want to make sure it fits. So, because, you know, space is always a concern, usually on the hydronic side, but when we get in the steam side, gosh, those boilers get so big. So,
And I assume most of your jobs, you don't do any like
no,
direct install, right?
yeah, we'd rather pair up with a contractor, and the contractor would do the install, and then we'll take care of doing startup warranty and, you know, continue from there on. You know, some customers, they have their own staff that does opening, closing, and there's other customers that they have, you know, nobody. And so if something happens, you know, who you going to call? Well, the company that helped you get the boiler in there is who they're going to call.
Do you have any, I guess, good examples of working with a contractor? I know some contractors like to have an all or nothing mentality, but I've seen value, and I hope you've seen value in the past of a contractor teaming up with a expert in boilers, and then hopefully experts in other fields of the equipment that they're installing, and how that relationship can benefit both parties. And it's not this all or nothing mentality, and how contractors anywhere in the United States can rely on a specialty contractor, and like why a specialty boiler room contractor is valuable to a project.
I think it's important to have somebody that's well versed on boilers, because they kind of pick up the slack where somebody may have forgotten. Like, for example, gas pressure regulators. You know, we got to keep the gas pressure in mind. If it's too high, got to put a regulator in there. You know, if it's steam, well, do you have a deaerator? Do we have modulating feed water? Do we have on-off feed water? You know, those kind of things that you got to keep in mind, or else it can really put you in a pickle. I mean, we've seen that a couple times where engineers will come back to us and say, "Hey, man, did you happen to put the modulating feed water valve in there? You know, I forgot it in my drawing." Like, oh yeah, we got it. It's no problem. Because, you know, otherwise that's like an $8,000 mistake if you forget to put in a modulating feed water valve, and either if you're using like a McDonnell Miller or a Siemens proportioning system, you know, that's a rather expensive mistake there that, you know, who's going to eat it? I don't really particularly want to, but we'd rather take care of that stuff up front.
Yeah. So a boiler room install, if people are not aware, it's very easy to set a boiler. It's very easy to set a feed water tank, deaerator, and set all the equipment. It's kind of like building a building where, you know, you put up the red iron and maybe some glass on the outside, and it looks like the building is 90% complete. where it's only really 90% of the space. But then the contractors take another 18 months to complete the rest of the inside of the building. And you're like, man, it seemed to go up so fast, but then all those little details, why do they take so long? Same thing with a boiler installation where you can set the boiler, set all the equipment super quick, and it looks like your boiler room's coming together. But one little mistake, like not having a modulating feed water valve or not having your pump set up correctly for modulating feed water, that is something that can be the difference between a boiler running and not running. And a specialty contractor can easily spot that out and point you in the right direction and avoid even making that mistake before you make it. You can make a mistake and then it costs double to backtrack and, redo the install and whatnot. But a specialty contractor should be able to say and have the experience of, hey, we see this, it has to be done this way. And, no engineer draws every single electrical wire and every single piping, pipe and all that stuff, connection between all the equipment. And a specialty contractor is the person that can easily mend those connections. And that's what that last 10% of details of the job can make or break a boiler room running well. And that's where I find value of the specialty contractor. And then on the service side, like what Indiana, is it a requirement for high pressure boilers to be opened yearly?
That's right. Yeah. High pressure steam is open yearly. Low pressure steam is every other year. Hydronics, it depends on the manufacturer. So, usually they want to do like a visual inspection every year, but again, it depends. Like we've got some Ajax hot water boilers and they're open every other year. But for the most part, the inspectors, like on a copper fin boiler, they're just doing every other year to just do like a visual inspection of the boiler, which I, as long as there's not water running out of it, I mean, I don't really know what they're looking for because they're not opening up the fire side or the water side of those boilers, and they're just, all right, we're good to go.
Yeah, a lot of newer hydronic boilers, especially the condensing ones, no water side access, which is a lot different than what a lot of older boiler guys are used to. But since you're in Evansville, Indiana, right on the tippy end, I guess, what is your service area? Do you have issues? Like, so you have to, I mean, how many states? So each state has different boiler laws and stuff. Like, is it hard to bounce over state lines, or is it pretty the same in that area?
It's so we do service in Indiana, Kentucky, a little bit into Illinois, and then a tiny bit into Tennessee, just a tiny, tiny bit. And then we've got one customer in Ohio. We really haven't had many problems with, bouncing through states. The only issue you've really had is, what does the state inspector want? Like in Kentucky, they want the relief valves on a high pressure steam boiler changed every year. Or they'd tell you, well, we want it popped every quarter. Well, you do that, and what do you think happens? It's ready for a rebuild or replacement by the time you do that. So a lot of our customers just go ahead and replace them. Illinois, I had a project on a low pressure steam plant at a school that we were yanking the tubes out of the boiler, and the state inspector came in and said, all right, boiler's passed. Like, there's no tubes in the boiler. And he goes, yeah, I know, but you're Cici Boiler Rooms, so you're good to go. Like, yeah, but can you do your job? Yeah, for the most part, we haven't had many issues bouncing through states.
Yeah, that is so if you've been in the boiler industry, you'll know the lack of experience is frightening, and companies are searching for service technicians, sales people that know something all the time. The inspection agencies and states have the exact same problem. We are not isolated as an industry. All industries are having this problem of older generations leaving at a record pace. And yeah, I've had a boiler inspector. It was a vapor circulatic, and if you're not familiar with those, it is a horizontal spiral coil with a pump that heats up water under high temperature water and then high pressure, and then as it spits that water into a tank, and since the tank expands the volume, the water flashes into steam, and that's how it makes steam. It's a steam generator. And this inspector could not wrap his mind around why there was a pump on a steam boiler, and why he's like, so it pumps steam. I'm like, no, it pumps water. He's like, but it's a steam boiler. I'm like, yes, but there's water that pumps through these coils, and then it comes into this tank and flashes, and it becomes steam. He's like, so it's a steam pump. I'm like, no, it's a water pump. There's no such thing as a steam pump. And he couldn't wrap his mind around it. He's like, oh, all right, well, I just trust you. And then pass the boiler and moves on. And like just because, somebody works for an insurance agency or the state, like, doesn't mean that they're an expert. Like, they just have the minimum requirements. And part of the boiler industry is checking up on contractors from an insurance and state requirement that contractors are doing the correct thing. I always assume Cici Boiler Rooms is doing things above bar, but there are contractors who will make welds on boilers that are not permissible. Like, you need special certifications and permits to make a weld on a pressure vessel of a boiler. And if contractors start doing that, now you undercut the safety, and you're putting the customer's safety, and it makes it for a dangerous situation. I guess, would you say that you have, not to call anybody out, but do you have other contractors doing boiler repairs that, you think are scary, that should never touch a boiler? Or,
Yeah, we ran into that when I first started. There was a story that came out about they specialized in doing residential HVAC and doing some commercial HVAC, and they replaced a tube in a boiler, and they just went and got a boiler tube, stuck her in there, and stick welded it in there. And the state inspector found out about that, and he was not happy, to say the least. So, yeah, we have seen that happen, and that changed a lot of things. In Kentucky especially, it used to be that they would let us replace tubes because they just considered that maintenance. And then after that one contractor replaced the tube by they didn't roll it or anything. They just stuck her in there and welded it up and said, hope for the best. And obviously it failed. And from then on, they said, all right, anybody that's rolling tubes, replacing tubes, you got to have an R stamp. And we did so few tube replacements, tube repairs, that we just said, all right, fine. It is what it is. So, yeah, we do occasionally see that happen.
Do you hire out all your welding and R stamp?
We do. Yeah, there's a couple contractors in our area that we're fortunate to have that they just do R stamp repairs. They're doing, big time power plant stuff, doing membrane wall replacements, the real high energy piping that we don't touch because you have to have all those stamps in order to do anything on it. And, although it's small work, they seem to be happy to give us a hand doing our little R stamp repairs on our, 150 PSI boilers.
That's the benefit of building relationships between companies, and you don't have to be the one size fits all. And a lot of boiler companies do hire out their welding, as while it seems like welding is part of boilers, it's almost its own world in itself, in that yes, there are tons of companies that do have their own boiler and have all the certification welders in house, but there's so much cost to get that up started and to maintain that, and all the certifications, and especially if difference between union and non-union, and boiler makers versus pipe welders, and there's so much that goes into it. And then tack on top of, hey, now you need to also worry about combustion and safety controls and proper installation and all this stuff. Like the boiler industry in itself, like huge width of knowledge, that it is hard for a company to competently cover the entire width of that knowledge. And that's you build relationships with other companies, and you use those relationships. And like, I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but I think a lot of larger companies, uh, maybe outside of the boiler industry, but a lot of larger companies have they want the full vertical integration and the full pipeline, and it's the all or nothing mentality. But a lot of those companies can afford to buy up their entire vertical integration, but now you have to get them to all work together, and that doesn't always happen.
Yeah, I mean we're all in it to make money. We're in it to make money and make the customer happy. We work with a lot of reps that they don't have a startup or service department. They may have one guy that just does startups on like condensing or hot water boilers. And they may have a steam boiler line, but they don't have a service staff. So what do? Got to have somebody. And we try and, work with all our, not really competitors, but, people that we're close to in the area, just because we know, like, hey, there's some jobs they're going to get, there's some jobs we're going to get, and let's meet in the middle and see where we can do business together. We may not make the most on some projects, but something's better than nothing. And I really enjoy working with other reps from other companies and other reps from the same company, seeing where we can help each other. Like we've had cases where someone says, "Well, I got a gas valve that went bad. It took me a week," and I'm like, "Wish you would have called us. Like, I got it in stock. Just to because now the customer's happy and the contractor's happy because they're able to get the customer up and going a whole lot faster." And just that whole, how can we work together mentality, I think is important for this industry. Because we can't all stock 4-inch Maxon valves, but I can stock all the 3x4 by half gaskets you want. It we're all in it.
Yeah, how's your parts stock? Because I know, especially seeing some of the boiler Facebook groups, people are always asking, "Hey, does anybody have this part?" And you're always commenting, "Hey, call me," or reach out here. Like, and that's another benefit, I guess, of a specialized boiler contractor, is that they are more likely to have access to those parts that you're not going to find in a HVAC supply warehouse like Johnstone and Ferguson and those places. So I guess what's your parts supply look like?
So we've got about $1 million worth of parts inventory at any one time, but we try and stock all of the basics, handhole, manhole gaskets, your rope gaskets, um, your we do kind of specialize in doing some of the old obsolete stuff, the Kiwanis and the Ajax and the Gordon Pyatt burners. We stock a lot of parts for all those. Um, especially Gordon Pyatt. We were a Gordon Pyatt rep for a long time, and there's a lot of Gordon Pyatt burners out there, and it's sad that they kind of ended up where they did. Um, but we try our best to support that market because there's plenty of old Wall McLean boilers that are out there that have a Gordon Pyatt, maybe an oil only burner, and that customer may not have the money to spend on getting a brand new burner. So let's keep her going as long as we can, and support them. But we were also a rep for a certain boiler manufacturer that used a lot of proprietary parts, and we've kind of figured out, all right, how can we deal with this stuff? Because a lot of it's incredibly proprietary, rear doors and gasket kits. How do we service those customers? Even if they didn't buy from us, well, they still got to get the gasket kits. How do we help them?
Yeah, and that's another large part of on the customer side. I never bought a boiler. I hope to one day buy a boiler. But the customers, when you buy a boiler, you have to look at, am I buying a system that is full of a bunch of circuit boards that the boiler manufacturer put together, or is it built by a lot of bolt-on items from third-party manufacturers? And like a typical fire tube will be a bunch of third-party manufacturer items, which are available on the shelf and readily available. But I know there's some companies out there, and I guess PowerFlame is the easiest example. Some older PowerFlame, and you don't even have to go much older, but for some reason they had made a circuit board for their flame safeguard. Most of it was 7800, and the 7800, instead of plugging onto a normal sub base, plugged onto this circuit board, and they had this whole integration. Then that circuit board fed up to another circuit board that went on the top of the burner control cabinet. And I believe PowerFlame stopped making that like 4 or 5 years ago, and they stopped supporting that board. And if that board goes bad, now you have to retrofit your burner. And it's not a huge change. You got to change the wiring, but like that board, only PowerFlame makes that board. Nobody else is going to make that board. And if you have an issue with that, you can either get it through a PowerFlame or PowerFlame rep and then still hope that they make it, or you rewire your burner. And that's the difference between a specialized part that's for the manufacturer versus like a third party part. Like Honeywell with a 7800 sells a mounting sub mount that you just stick the 7800 on, and you can buy that sub mount at any Honeywell supplier, and that's easy to get. But a specialized PowerFlame circuit board it's not available anymore, and you gotta retrofit it. And there are boiler manufacturers out there that have way more of those specialized parts on their equipment. For better or worse, it's hard to say. A lot of them will say, we've engineered it to all work together, and we get more efficiency or more reliability out of it. But yeah,
That's a tough one. I mean, that same manufacturer you're talking about, they made the certain parallel positioning system that a lot of burner manufacturers use because it was super cheap. And boy, when they stopped making that whole system, we didn't sell very many before switching over to Siemens, but it made us look like crap. The system, although these systems were 10 years old or older, a lot of our customers expected us to, "Well, what do you mean you don't have the parts in stock on the shelf ready to go?" Um, we told them like, "Hey, you're gonna have to like do something because at least for us, like the actuators had just dried up." And I don't know if you saw the announcement, but when they put out the announcement, they said, well, unless you had your PO into us last week, your order was canceled. I'm like, oh, thanks. How are we supposed to tell our customers that, hey, man, that $20,000 boiler control system that you put on there, yeah, it's all scrap, and you're gonna have to invest money into another system that will be better, but won't save you any money. It's just gonna keep you up and running. Like, that's kind of a hard pill to swallow, at least in my book. I don't like that at all. I don't like having to tell customers you have a mandatory upgrade that you have to do.
Speaking of upgrades, so say I'm a customer, I got a fire tube boiler and got an old Gordon Pyatt, and say, hey, I want to upgrade you come out, you look at the fire tube, it's in good condition, and say, what efficiency upgrades can I do? Like what is the process of like looking at, hey, do we just, go from linkage to a parallel positioning system, or do we put on a new burner, or like do we, totally rewire the boiler and, change out all the controls and like kind of make it a brand new boiler? Like how do you present that to a customer as like, because all customers basically, most of them are, what's the payback? Because most customers see a boiler as a cost and not an asset to make money.
Yeah. So I there's a couple things you can do. I like to present a couple options for the customers. Um, first is for me is parallel positioning, just because it reduces fuel between 5 and 10%, sometimes more. But it also increases the functionality of the boiler. Now we know, what firing rate the boiler's at. We now know if there is a problem, it will tell us, not just, hey man, like boiler's in standby. Um, but I really enjoy, I think my customers do enjoy having the parallel positioning systems, because I think it's beneficial for them all. Um, Economizers are a little bit harder to sell, just because there's a couple different ways you can pipe it up, but there's more mechanical installation involved with those. You have, if you don't have modulating feed water, well, you gotta switch to modulating feed water. Or you can kind of run it off of a circulating pump that runs back through the surge tank, and it kind of works, but then you have to keep in mind, like, well, I don't want to overheat the surge tank. Um, but or as far as like the burner upgrade goes, was the burner sized correctly? We've ran into that a couple times on really old boilers, where we've had one customer had a 125 horsepower boiler they bought used, and it came with a 300 horsepower Gordon Pyatt burner on it. And, that was a huge problem for them, because the the burner was so oversized we could only tune it at low fire, because that was low fire on the burner was maximum output on the boiler. Um, putting a correctly sized burner on there, or even looking at derating the boiler by putting a smaller burner on there. That makes a big difference too for a customer that has a process that they've found out that, well, it's the unit we have is a lot bigger than what we actually need. Um, those are a real nice payback option. One of the first burner retrofits we did was on a hot oil heater where I think it was like a 12 million BTU input, and they were cycling constantly, but their load never fell off. So we ended up doing a burner replacement on that because it just made complete sense. We derated it by like half, and they never lost uh, production capacity, but their gas rate got cut in half. So for them, it was a huge plus doing a burner upgrade. Um, but not every customer is a burner upgrade. On some of those customers that have an integral burner, what do you do on those? And I think on those, the best option is again doing a control upgrade. I'm not quite there on doing those burner retrofits because I've heard some other customers that have done burner retrofits on boilers with integral burners, and a lot of those boilers rely on a very short flame, and if that flame is quite long on a European style burner, then it just cooks that rear door. And you know replacing a 96-inch rear door is, you're looking at 30 grand easily. So any savings you thought you might have are just out the window when you have to replace a rear door.
Do you have a payback calculator, or is there like one? Did you build one, or is there one online? I know, I think I can think of a couple off the top of my head of payback calculators, but I believe they're for a full boiler. Like, I guess, how do you determine payback of a parallel positioning system versus, hey, here's a new burner with a parallel positioning system? Or, I mean, it's.
I think it's so when doing a parallel positioning system, we've done multiple, for example, a 200 horsepower, 4-pass boiler. You go to parallel positioning and the payback is like a year. So right there, you save, year after year, $25,000 per boiler on fuel use. Burner upgrades, there are some payback calculators as well. The economizer manufacturers also have a payback calculator. But I think usually most economizers are in that 3 to 5% efficiency savings. And plus, the cost of installation is a lot higher on doing an economizer. And I don't think a lot of customers realize that, hey, this is, it's a little more involved than just slapping new controls on it. Like we gotta do some pipe work on it.
Yeah, an economizer, probably the biggest issue is headspace, but some boiler manufacturers don't build their boiler to support an economizer. So you have to look at, what size economizer do we need? And we can't support this weight on the boiler, so now we need a support structure, and then you have to repipe your feed water. And you end up, it's one of those things that's easy to do when the boiler is new on a new installation because it's planned for, but it's almost, it's like double the cost probably to put it in there if the conditions are not right, because there is so much involvement and change of removing the stack, moving the stack up, or sections, and then repiping everything, and then changing the modulating feed water, and all for maybe the 3 or 5%. And I guess if the math works out, it's worth it at some point. But
There's so many ways that an economizer retrofit or an install can go so wrong. I mean, we've had them where we had a hospital that they have some 600 horsepower boilers, and the engineer stipulated that the vent, so it came out of the boiler, immediately made a 90, and then went 6 feet, went through an economizer, and then went 50 feet horizontal, made a 90, and then went up another 40 feet. And the engineer didn't, he just, a lot of these engineers just provide, they think that an economizer is an economizer is an economizer. It's, whatever the supplier is selling me is what I need. Well, that's kind of a case where, again, having someone that knows a thing or two about boilers will kind of tell you, like, you have to account for those bends and that length of run. And there's all different ways you can make an economizer cheaper or more expensive by determining the back pressure on it. Do you have the standard 0.25 inches water column of back pressure, or do you make it a little bit cheaper and add a little bit more back pressure to it? What does that look like? And for that one hospital, they happen to have a doctor's break room right above the boilers. And do you think those boilers were really quiet with that stack run? Absolutely not. So we had to put in some mechanical draft to help get those flue gases out, just because they had so much back pressure on the boilers. And that's not really something the engineer took into account. He probably just assumed, like, well, the boiler manufacturer or the boiler representative is going to get me the right economizer. And sometimes that's the case, and other times, well, the low bid, adds more back pressure to it. And that can be a really big problem. So that's where we've kind of, it's a tough sell at times doing an economizer.
What about retrofit where the customer is limited on ceiling height? Is there any options? Because if they don't have room for a traditional economizer, is there an option or some other route that they can go?
You can put them on a roof. We've done that a couple times. It's not ideal, and you do have to, if you're running them when you have it on the roof, if you do happen to have a really cold day and you're not running that boiler, then yes, you do need to drain it down. That's kind of a last ditch of, if someone wants an economizer, but how do you do it? Putting it on the roof's not super ideal. But there's also economizer designs that are kind of like a trash can, where they're a coil heat exchanger, and those are a little bit narrower. Again, you don't recover nearly as much heat, but again, some places just want to say they have an economizer, and well, if it saves money, great. If not, well, we're being green. So
what about an economizer integral to the boiler?
We've done a couple of those, and they do work out really well, because the manufacturer is accounting for, all right, we know we have some back pressure on it, and then arranging the fins in a certain pattern that recovers the most heat, but also doesn't have the most back pressure on it. The big benefit to it is that there is zero additional mechanical installation that you have to do. There's no rigging. There's no flanges you have to do. It's just, bam, you set the boiler in place. It's got its economizer pre-piped and everything, and you just run a return line back to the deaerator, and you're good to go. And
can you kind of explain what it looks like, or the design for the people who are not familiar with a internal economizer for like a fire tube boiler?
Yeah. So what it is you have a tube bundle that goes on the stack outlet. And so the smoke box is what they call it, but that's where the tube bundle goes. And so it doesn't add any additional height or length to the boiler. It just slips right in that smoke box area. And so the boiler manufacturers will pre-pipe those up with modulating feed water. So the customer or contractor doesn't have to do almost anything more than just run a return line back to the deaerator. And of course your feed water line. But it's a very, very simple and effective way of getting an economizer into a space that normally wouldn't be able to utilize an economizer. They don't recover as much heat as a full blown economizer, like a full blown external economizer. But they're still in that 3% range, and they're out of a deaerator, we've seen them where they're adding another 30 degrees to the feed water temperature. So it's going in the boiler, it's almost 260 degrees, which is pretty good.
On the fuel side, is there I'm not super familiar. Most of my experience is natural gas and then backup on fuel oil. Is there any concerns if somebody's primary fuel oil about having an economizer, I guess, with condensing it all on, I don't know. I've heard people destroying economizers, especially if they have number 2 fuel oil.
So I have not had one get destroyed, but I know it's possible because, condensing with oil will corrode stainless steel and carbon steel for that matter. Usually the temperatures running through the economizer are so hot on a non-condensing traditional economizer that we don't run into issues with condensing. The condensing economizers, I have not personally dealt with them. I know some of them have baffles on the inside of it to direct any condensate that may fall off the tube so that the condensate does not go in the boiler. But there are some manufacturers that don't really take that into account, and I kind of have to worry about that. At least for us, running on oil, usually it's a hospital that will ask to have fuel oil backup, and they're running usually ultra low sulfur oil, and we haven't had any issues with corrosion from running on oil, but it's certainly possible. Yeah.
As far as fuels kind of turn into that, if you've been a part of politics or just turned on the news in the last 5 years, everybody's going electric, 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 and electricity is going to save the whole world and move all the emissions back to electrical generation plants. In your area, do you see projects, or have you been involved in more projects that are electric boilers, or even hydrogen? Interested to hear about hydrogen. I see hydrogen blend skids and hydrogen this, hydrogen that. And from what I am familiar with, unless the customer somehow gets hydrogen for cheap or it's a byproduct or something, like the cost of hydrogen is way more than just running natural gas.
Yeah, and we have a couple people in our area that I know that hydrogen's a byproduct, and so they're running hydrogen through their water tube boilers. As far as switching to electric, we had a pharmaceutical company in our area switch to all electric, and their cost of use went up 10 times what their gas use was. Now, they were their gas use, I mean, they had 3 water tube boilers. So going to electric that's a stretch. And, their idea was that, well, we're going to put in solar panels to offset the electricity cost. Well, even after putting in football fields worth of solar panels, they're still 10 times what their fuel use was the year prior, just running on natural gas. Now, I think we're all trying to be kinder to the environment. We're all trying to be greener. But, I mean, a lot of those old boilers have almost unrestricted emissions. So even just going to a high efficiency burner that has, say, 60 ppm NOx, I think that's a plus. Maybe we don't go down to doing electric. Well, maybe let's just improve what we've got, and that'll help the environment. Or, on the hot water side, maybe let's not have an atmospheric hot water boiler. Let's look at a condensing or a copper fin boiler that has, 12, 9 ppm NOx or 20 ppm NOx. Anything's better than what we got. But as far as switching to electric and hydrogen, I'm not seeing it. A couple years ago, a lot of the boiler manufacturers came out with heat pumps. Either it's a water heater or a boiler. And the cost of running those it's rather high. And I'm not quite sold on heat pumps during the winter, during the coldest days. You got to have some supplemental heat in my mind. But yeah, I'm not seeing it as much as some areas like California. Does it work? Yeah. Is it the most economical? Probably not. And are we really saving that much money? I don't think so. Like we've got, I hate to go off on a tangent, but we've got some ethanol plants in our area, and one of them's got to run at like 7 ppm NOx, and their efficiencies are kind of crap because all they're concerned about is, can we get 7 ppm NOx? They don't care about, well, what's our efficiency? What's our excess air in our boiler? It's what's our NOx? And I don't know. I think that's kind of backwards. Do we use more fuel to make greener combustion byproducts, or do we use less fuel and make it as efficient as we can with what we've got? So I can't answer that, but what I do know is that ultra low NOx stuff is just, it gets expensive quickly, and you have to have the means to, deal with it. Like a couple weeks ago, I saw an article about a marathon plant in California threatening to leave because they couldn't meet emissions. I mean, are the citizens of California going to be okay with, what was it, like 20 or 30% higher gasoline at the pump? I don't know. But that's up for Marathon to decide. But what I know is that they're leaving because of emissions, and it's difficult sometimes to really get that low.
Yeah, California has this, not that it's a wrong mentality, but you set a benchmark and then it's always push the benchmark. And now, I mean, they've had 9 ppm NOx, 5 ppm NOx, and now I've seen discussions about 0 or even like full ban. I know they're attempting to ban, the sale of new internal combustion cars in the next couple of years. I believe the Supreme Court overturned that, but it's this constant push. And I would say that most boiler companies, everybody wants to care about the environment. I don't think anybody's like, yes, put smoke in the air. Like, we've come a long way as a boiler industry in the last 100 years, especially even with coal. A lot, the general public hears coal and they think black skies, dirty, terrible. But the amount of emissions and scrubbing and the technology behind coal, I've never seen a coal boiler in person. If you work at a power plant or listening to this, invite me out. But the amount of scrubbing and the like what the EPA has done for, to make companies clean the exhaust coming out of their stacks, like we have come a long, long way, and there is a way to burn clean coal, and there is a way to burn natural gas in a efficient environmental way where it doesn't need to be a binary conversation of it's either all electric or nothing, or it's either, we're going to hydrogen or nothing. It's a blend, and it's a lot of, what works best for the application. As you mentioned, that pharmaceuticals, electric bill going up, a lot of electric boilers are great until the customer gets the quote for the substation that needs to go in to power those electric boilers. And then they're like, well, maybe we don't want to do that. And I've seen in the past, with the whole efficiency thing, I've seen school districts build a new school. They're replacing a school from the 60s, and they build a whole new school, and they have, maybe like $1 million a year to maintain the building or whatever. And they're used to that. And, most school districts aren't overflowing with cash. So they think it's going to be $1 million a year to maintain a new building, or even less because they think it's a new building. Well, now they install all this high efficiency stuff, energy wheels in their air handlers. And, they checked every single option when on the sheets when they are ordering the equipment, because they want to be energy efficient. And all those options end up costing a large amount of money in maintenance, where an old Ajax boiler that's atmospheric, you might have to go and clean the flame rod once a year, maybe, but that's it. But now if you move to a condensing boiler, you have gasket kits, you have combustion, and, you got to watch your water treatment, look at your loop, and, you have way more alarms, you have PLCs, touchscreens, electronics, and there's a lot more that goes into it and involvement. And the full life cycle equipment cost has to be a conversation and a thought beyond the initial equipment purchase. Because as you get more technology packed into equipment, normally more technology means higher maintenance costs. And if customers are not planned for that, then they end up not using or bypassing that. Like I've seen economizers bypassed, where customers just don't want to pay for new tubes, or they get a quote for new tubes and they're like, we'll just bypass it, whatever. And they don't see the 3 to 5%, reduction in their fuel bill or increase. Like the money comes from different pockets, and so they don't really care. So they just bypass it. Like they don't want to maintain the economizer. So that's,
Yeah, we've seen a lot of that. I mean, we've got one place that it's a prison, and they have steam boilers, obviously, and they have almost no condensate return. And it's like, why? Why is that? But they're concerned about efficiency of the boilers. Like, bring back the darn condensate. Stop putting it to drain. And then they're concerned about the capacity of their wastewater treatment plant. I'm like, bring back your darn condensate. Our wastewater treatments, we're having problems there. Well, yeah, you're putting it to drain, and you're having to deal with wastewater that's 180 degrees plus. But yeah, the condensing boilers, I don't think that people really realize what you have to do to get to 96, 99% efficiency. What does your return water temperature look like? You've got stack material that is very expensive. You have condensate receivers that you have to keep up with. You have, again, you're right. The annual maintenance kits that some boiler manufacturers have. I mean, you're looking at at minimum, $1,500, $2,000 per boiler per year to, have someone come out there and put in a maintenance kit. And although some boiler manufacturers do have a 2-year kit, well, that, you know, are you really, it's still a yearly upkeep that you have to do because those mesh burners don't live forever, nor do the blower motor assemblies. I mean, you've got integral blower assemblies with VFDs on them. So now you got to keep up with those. Your blower motor on a cast iron hot water blower may be, $200, a half horsepower 56C frame that you can get on Amazon practically. And, you tell them that, oh, your boiler manufacturer obsoleted your entire blower assembly with motor. Congratulations, it's $12,000 for a new blower assembly. And well, I really have to wonder how much savings they're really getting, especially when it comes to heating. You're only running those boilers, at least for us, it's, maybe October through March, maybe realistically like November through February is when you're primarily running those. Is upgrading to a condensing boiler really worth it? Because I don't know. We've had some sales reps that have came out and said, well, it doesn't matter what return water temperature you have. It's going to be 95, 96% efficiency. Like, okay. That's one of those, used car salesman tactics that just drives me crazy because that's not true. And it's kind of hard to explain to the customer that, oh yeah, your 96 plus certified AHRI boiler is nowhere close to running at that efficiency. Sorry about your luck.
Yeah. So for anybody that's not aware, to get those kind of efficiencies, 95+% efficient, the return water temps have to be between like 70 to 90 degrees. And the amount of applications that actually have that low of return water temps are very few and far between. And they're probably going to be brand new applications, not retrofits. If you have a retrofit that just runs 180-degree water, you would almost probably do the customer better by just putting in an outdoor reset and, either leaving the boilers or, if they need new boilers, just putting in standard non-condensing boilers, and that outdoor reset runs it from 150 to 180 and the customer will save money. It doesn't always have to be a condensing boiler conversation. And the whole condensing boiler, it's easy to calculate that you'll save money on fuel, but you have to, it's harder to calculate and look at the full life cycle costs. Like if you save $1,000 a year on fuel, or even 10 grand or whatever, if your maintenance costs increase by 5x over the old boiler, are you really saving any money? And then, you may be saving money on your fuel bill, but then your maintenance cost goes up. And when you balance everything out, and in terms of life cycle, a lot of these condensing boilers, 10 years, hopefully minimum, but 20 years maximum, especially with all the electronics in them now. I think we've just exited the bad electrical stage. Probably 2005 to 2015, we had some rough electronics and innovation in all areas of the world, especially in the boiler. We saw it in cars, taking, standard radios to, Bluetooth and all that. And now we're getting kind of wild. But, you look at a brand new car and it's a touch or it's a screen from left to right across the dash. It's like, how much is that? What does that cost when that goes out? And, your car can't run without that. It's the same thing with your boiler. If that touchscreen goes out, hopefully the manufacturer didn't make that touchscreen, so it's available touchscreen. And what does that cost? And now you just bought a $3,000 touchscreen, and that could negate all your fuel savings over the past couple of years from that touchscreen. And then you got to buy the gasket kits, and then 15 years later, maybe you're looking at a new boiler, and maybe a non-condensing boiler would have lasted twice. A lot of customers are used to cast iron non-condensing boiler. You're pulling one out from the 60s or 70s, and they expect that same life cycle, and that's just not practical with a condensing boiler with the amount of electronics that are on them. And setting that expectation is hard sometimes.
Yeah, especially with the upfront cost of a condensing boiler. I mean, it's easily 100% more than just doing a standard efficiency boiler. Um, but yeah, you're right. I mean, the the metals used by most condensing boilers are stainless steel because they've got to deal with that really corrosive uh, condensate. And, I've seen a couple ways of, building heat exchangers, but in the end, like stainless steel is not a great conductor of heat. Like it's inherently not great. It doesn't like fluctuations in temperature. It's kind of poor at conducting heat. I mean, that's why you saw a lot of copper fin boilers in the 80s and 90s come out. It's because copper is such a good conductor of heat. Um, Even cast iron's pretty decent at conducting heat, but stainless steel, the 429, 316, 304, like all that stuff, like man, it's not great. And how do you deal with, having a heat exchanger that doesn't like absorbing the heat? You know, I've seen some that have put micro fins on the heat exchangers in order to deal with it. I've seen some that, have a wave or a different pattern of making the tube. Or on the water tube side, how do we build the coil? But really it's, I don't know, it's a tough challenge. And you know as well as I do that if you happen to have a heat exchanger failure on a condensing boiler, you might as well just take a forklift in there and scrap it. Like it's not, there's no repairing those heat exchangers. Once they're done, they are done. And a cost of a new heat exchanger, we replaced one on a 2 million BTU boiler, and the heat exchanger alone was $18,000, I think it was, my cost. So I, and the boiler was only uh 7 years old. How do we tell the customer, congratulations, you have a 7-year-old piece of scrap metal. What do you do? And that's again one of those cases that, man, I don't like those situations at all. It makes me look bad, it makes the manufacturer look bad. And, you know, what if something was designed wrong? What if they have a lot of makeup in a hot water system that's causing scale? I can't really tell the customer, well, you screwed yourself over. So, um,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's where it goes back to installation, and the first year of life of the boiler sets it up for that long term. And if the installation is wrong, or the customer doesn't have the proper maintenance program for that boiler, or they have unrealistic expectations for the boiler, it's probably going to end up bad, no matter the manufacturer. Each manufacturer, like a lot of people say, oh, they don't build them like they used to. Like manufacturers could make boilers with heat exchangers with 1-inch thick steel, but nobody would pay for them. Like the at the end of the day, the market and consumers and government regulations have driven the point to, hey, we have to maximize the efficiency of the boiler. And when you do that, you end up having to make trade-offs that sometimes will lower the life of the boiler. And there's some of the longest lasting boilers. I mean, there's boilers from the 40s and 50s that are still running, and they're not the most efficient, but I mean, customers have gotten their money out of them, but you're never going to see that again from a new boiler that is, you can see it on a standard fire tube, but anything that's on the condensing market, that's not realistic. And that's going back to setting expectations. But from a specialized contractor, it's not going in and, hey, this is what you need and nothing else. It's presenting the options. Hey, a retrofit, you could go condensing, but these are the costs, and this is the annual cost, and maybe here's 10-year cost. But if we just did non-condensing, and maybe we just replace your cast iron boiler with a cast iron boiler, and we don't have any emissions requirements, and this is what going to be the cost. Here's the annual cost. Here's a flame rod and 4 hours to make sure that we don't have gas leaks and to put an analyzer in it, and you're at 80% of the cost of a gasket kit on a condensing boiler, and then here's the 10-year cost. It's like you're probably what you may run condensing temperatures. Is in the Midwest, you may run condensing temperatures, end of September to maybe November, and then, maybe a month or two in the spring. And then the rest of that, you're going to be running up to 180 because your building was designed for 180. So it's like, it really doesn't make sense to throw a condensing boiler in here, even though it may sound like you're going to be saving money and sound like it's going to be more efficient. It's actually not more efficient. And then the life cycle is going to be less than a standard non-condensing boiler, especially like a cast iron sectional, where, I mean, cast iron sectional is probably as simple as a boiler as they come, and they're tried and true, and they're very easy to get in and out of spaces, especially in the Midwest. You probably got churches and schools where the boiler room isn't on the outside, or it's in the basement, and hey, we have to take apart your entire roof or blow out the sidewall to get a new boiler in there. Whereas a cast iron condensing boiler, you can carry down in sections, or not cast iron non-condensing boiler, carry down in sections, and like that. There's all kinds of options, and that's where a specialized boiler contractor like Cici Boiler Rooms or anybody else that specializes in boilers can go through those options with the customer and present them the options so that the customer can make an informed decision instead of just saying it's all or nothing, it's this or that. Last topic I want to get into is training and development. Obviously a big topic for companies these days. Everybody's trying to hire experienced people. Everybody needs experience, but you also have to develop experience. What are you doing to attract talent or attract employees in your area? What are you seeing? Do you find value in vocational schools? Are you going to high schools, doing any outreach programs to even make the community aware of like even what a boiler is or anything like that?
Yeah. So I do find a lot of benefit in vocational schools. Especially electrical programs, that helps a lot. Combustion is kind of a art versus a mathematical science. There's a little bit more play in there, but electrical is either it's right or it's wrong. And but yeah, we've hired some folks from areas that they had expressed interest in doing something else, but what they were doing. And I a lot of our training is done in-house. We've got some trainers set up that we can use to help them along, and throw them a curveball to see how to solve one of the problems if it's not one they've already seen. But the problem we've had with training with some of our customers is that they come back knowing a whole bunch of things, but it's all outside of what they really need to know. Like, we've had some that have came back and they said, well, I got to have hookups on the outside of the building for a rental boiler, and I got to get a new burner like ASAP. Well, that's kind of a pipe dream there. Really, do you need a connection for a rental boiler? Because you got 3 boilers and your boiler load's 1. Um, but really trying to focus on, you know, what the customer needs as well, provide them with on-site training, I think is really important. But as far as hiring people, we kind of rely on word of mouth, and also, do you know somebody who do you think is a hard worker? And do you think that they're going to be willing to learn, or are they going to just learn a couple of things and that's that? Um, there's a lot more than just being able to open and close a 4-pass dry back boiler. Um, you know, what about the control side of it, especially on the hydronic boilers as they become more and more control focused? Um, how do you work on those and the parallel positioning systems? Can you work on a couple of different systems? Because there's a lot of them out there. Can you kind of figure it out? Or we're happy to help you, but, can you be able to learn? I think is important. But yes, I think vocational schools are really important. I highly recommend them. I wish people knew more about, hey, a lot of manufacturers have boilers out there, and you can make a really good living servicing boilers. And, maybe instead of going into diesel tech or automotive, maybe you take a look at boilers, because, the tools that we use there's a lot less of them, and most boiler service companies provide the tools for their service tech. So in the long run, it's, a lot less costly for them. They're not having to pay the Snap-on truck every week. But I think that there's a lot of value in the trades, period. There's highly regard those jobs, and I wish more people looked into them instead of trying to say, well, you have to go to college, you have to get a degree in something. And
Communications.
Yeah, well, tell me about it. Yeah. I mean, that was kind of, the mentality of the high school that I went to was that you have to go to college. Well, darn if some of those people that went to trade school and got an electrician's license are doing fantastic right now. And there's a lot of folks that, I came out of college shortly after the stock market crash in 2008, where the only jobs available were retail jobs, oof. But meanwhile, those that had a trade, they were doing just fine, because those jobs are in such high demand right now. I wish they knew, the sky is the limit. You don't have to be someone who's gone every other month doing oil field work. You can work in town for a local mechanical contractor and make a great wage, and get great benefits, great vacation.
Yeah, I would say to anybody out there, if you're listening and your employer treats medical benefits or time off as like, hey, these are things that we're going to give you, or stuff that we are, or like stuff you've earned. Like I've seen some wild health plans out there where it's like the employee, to get health benefits from their employers, paying like, just the employee themselves have to pay like $2,000 from the employer, because the employer doesn't cover really anything. And then time off, the employer's like, why would I pay you for time off? And like all that stuff. Like if you know your stuff, if you're willing to learn, there are so many companies out there that have the correct mindset of, we need to care for our employees. Kind of what we talked about earlier this podcast, but we care for our employees. You're a human being, and medical benefits, time off, paid time off, vacation. Like that's normal. That's standard. We offer benefits on top of that, but I mean, I think it's still it's very prominent in residential, but there's still some fly by night commercial contractors where they treat their people as disposable, and oh, we're a small company, we can't afford benefits, we can't afford to pay you when you're off, we can't afford medical. That's all fine and dandy, but at the end of the day, like, the employee has to do what's best for them, and just because the owner doesn't know how to run a company correctly doesn't mean the employee should suffer. So there's so many companies out there that do it correctly. So if you're jaded by your current employer, you may have to move, but there are plenty of companies like Cici Boiler Rooms out there that actually care. They provide benefits. There's work-life balance, and it's not this travel 100% of the time, drive you into the ground, throw you off a ship, sink or swim mentality. And that's, a lot of people get burned out by that, and they leave the boiler industry or they leave the trades just because they had a bad experience, and they leave and never come back. And if we can't retain people, how are we going to hire and attract new people into the industry in the next 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, I can't think of a single boiler service company around here that is not looking at good talent to hire. I mean, for us, we're at the southern tip of Indiana, but yet we travel, up to Indy. Why? Because there's a need up there. There's not a lot of good boiler service companies. I don't know why, but we do it all the time, and our guys, if they want to travel, great. I mean, we've got those opportunities. If you are single and you want to put in those OT hours, by all means, it's available. So, but yeah, the boiler industry is, I think a lot of people overlook it, but it's a strong niche industry that you will have to apply a lot of the things that you did learn in trade school to what you're working on every day.
So if anybody's in the southern Indiana area, how do they get in touch with you if they're interested in learning about boilers or maybe employment?
So you're welcome to reach out to my email or my phone number. It's just chris@ccboilers.com. And, or, we've got our website, ccboilers.com. You're more than welcome to reach out to me. I'm happy to answer your questions, or you want me to say hi or whatever you need. I enjoy it all. So, we try our best to make sure our customers are happy, but, I learn something every day. And, if you've got a tip for me or tip for Eric, like, by all means, I'm here for it, because everything is changing all the time. Different manufacturers are coming out with different stuff, and I'm always willing to learn, what's out there. But yeah, if you're welcome to shoot me an email anytime.
Are you active on LinkedIn?
A little bit. Yeah, I majoritively read, and I don't really post a whole lot, but should I? Probably. But I'm usually there. I try and keep a low profile. I try not to offend anybody per se. Unlike that other social media company that I can, say something about a product and not have it scrutinized by everybody. I try and keep it very PG and, kind of focus on some of our products or projects more so than, hey, this burner burned up after 6 months. What happened here? Can you explain? That stuff I find is really fun, but you don't see a lot of it on LinkedIn, unfortunately.
Yeah, I try to tone down my posts. I'm trying not make enemies, but I also want to post the truth. And sometimes people think, oh, you're talking bad about this manufacturer, talking bad about this or that. I'm like, well, like if there is a problem, not talking about it, or only talking about it like behind the scenes or hush hush, or you're supposed to hide that. Like, yes, if it's a one-off thing here or there, but it's a, hey, I'm having this problem. Like, what are you guys seeing? And we can learn from each other. And it's not always like, at the end of the day, manufacturers, like, there's no boiler manufacturer out there that wants to put out a bad product or says, you know what, we're going to engineer this boiler to fail at 4 years and we're going to screw these customers over. Like, that's not what happens. And a lot of people get into that mindset. But if you have the mindset of, like, we're all just trying to deal with the world's problems, and like I heard this great thing about like the airline industry, of when things are good, the airline industry, all the airlines fight each other. But then when things are bad, all the CEOs get together and then they go cry to the federal government. But they all band together and they protect the industry and they protect themselves. I I think the boiler industry, sometimes we can rip ourselves apart from the inside out, and oh, it's this or that. It's like, hey, we're really all on the same playing field here, and we're all on this ship together and working together, and figuring out problems is a better solution than either not talking about them or ignoring them or blaming, or this or that, or it's this person's fault. That it doesn't really matter at the end of the day, as long as we can solve problems and make the industry better for everybody. And it's a very optimistic view, because at the end of the day, you have competitors, I have competitors, everybody has competitors. But like you said earlier, like there's enough boilers to go around for everybody, and it's not this one or all mentality. And yeah, so if you
Yeah,
are,
I
yeah, I
agree.
mean,
Like someone posted yesterday, like, hey, I got this 1-year-old boiler with a tube failure at the right at the inside of the boiler, uh, just past the tube roll. And I'm like, well, and they said, well, it's not chemical. I'm like, what is it? Like, I don't know. But those kind of things that come up, like, it's not really off the hip kind of questions, but it's certainly like, I want to know. I'm really curious because I haven't seen those in the field. How do I prevent that from happening? And someone said, well, it's the boiler is really short cycling and the tube is being stretched. I'm like, really? I have never heard that before. But if you have, then I'm here to listen to it. So, but yeah, those kind of questions, pop up, and when they get answered, I'm like, that fascinating for sure.
absolutely. You never know enough to not be too good to learn. And that's what makes anybody valuable, boiler industry or not, is you're always learning every single day. Well, I appreciate having you on. First guest of Boiler Wild. We are
Thank
making
you.
history here. And
Appreciate you having me on.
yeah, dropping insights. If you are in the South Indiana area, reach out to Cici Boiler Rooms, reach out to Chris. He's in the Facebook groups. He's on LinkedIn. Connect him on LinkedIn, even though he may not post a lot. He's there. He's available. He's a great person. And yes, any last words?
No, it's one of those things where I can talk for hours with almost any boiler guy on boilers. So, I'm here for it. I always enjoy hearing those oddball stories. So, especially, it comes to like, Eric, your experience on Ohio special boilers and my experience on everything but Ohio special boilers. So, but yeah, I appreciate you having me on. It's been great.
Absolutely.